Module 3. Now things are going to speed up a lot. So in this module, in a proper training, we would spend roughly the same amount of time we spent on the previous model, and it's about lists and data, basically. We would talk about what is a model, and we'll talk about it. Show you a little bit about models in Qt, a list view, a grid view, creating dynamic data. Then Nicolas will talk a little bit about how you load that data.
How many of you knows about the model view framework in Qt? Okay, so you already know about an MVC, well, the Qt way of MVC, etc., etc. Okay.
I have no idea what you're talking about. So, what is a model? Very simply, the model is the one individual item of a list, So a list model includes a list element, and the list element is this thing you see here. It has a picture, a name, a surname, telephone, favorite, an icon, and this is the things that it go with it. But then we have several types of lists to show. Let's start with the list view. The list view would start with the text. It's the delegate of this thing, and see it's the positionings and how we set this little item here. So let me show you the list example really quickly. If I had model 3 opened.
So basically, when you want to display a list of elements, you need 3 different things. You need a model. A model is the data. So for each element, it's, for example, the name, surname, address, telephone, etc. You need a delegate. A delegate is the way to display one item on the screen. So here you are going to use items like rectangle, image, text, etc. And finally, you need a view. The view is the way the different items are organized on the screen. So be it vertically, horizontally, in a grid, or on a path.
So, for example, here we have this list view. One thing that list view inherits is flickability, so it's flickable. And this is traditional phone thingy. And as you see here, we have our list view, and it defines where it's staying. So if you go here, you can see that the list view is here. And then we have a component, and the component, it's how it looks, the individual item. Then we have the other elements which are not very interesting here. The only thing I want to show is that the model is something else. It's the list model example, and it's the list model example.
F2.
Well, XML, sorry. Here it is. So it's just a list of all of the items inside our list. See? All of this stuff, the phone number. So it's basically a bit of data. And why am I showing you this? Especially from my position, I really don't care too much about dynamic data or where the data comes from. that's something I'll leave to Nicolas to do, to put data inside my user interface. But I do want to play with it. So if I'm using list views or grid views or all of those elements, I'll have to create something. I create this list models, which is, I kind of use them as mock data, where I create some data just for the use of to try out the user interface and use it in the application. So I find them very useful to work with. So you've seen ListView and, of course, ListView again as, for example, let me go back. Let's ListView example. List example. Anchors down, and we can state it to be horizontal, for example, just so you guys can see it. And the difference is that now the list works.
But that's something we are not used to see on a desktop application. An horizontal list view. We usually see a vertical list view. But on the phones, well, not for this, but it can be used.
Horizontal. Especially if you do things like this. Depending on the implementation you use to do the transition, sometimes you might want a list view that was vertical. Maybe when you rotate the phone, maybe you want it to be horizontal.
So, okay, can you show model and delegate?
Please.
Yeah. As I say, you need three different things to display a list view. So we have the list view here. And in the list view, we have two important properties, which are model and delegate. So the model is this, with one element for each line, with a name, surname, etc., etc. And the delegate is a list item delegate. And we are going to map some data from the model to the delegate. So we are going to say that the model name is going to be the enter name of the delegate. So that's how you are going to display things on the screen. And if I look at list item delegate, you'll see all the properties, intern name, intern surname, etc., etc., which are used after in the different text element, image element, item, I should say item. You understand how this thing works? Model, delegate, you create a mapping between model and delegate, and then a view which is using a model and a delegate. So.
No, the best way of learning this really is trying out, playing with it. It's a bit, when I started with list views and grid views, it was a bit daunting, and the way it's structured and the way you explain it in QML in the code, it's kind of not as obvious as the other stuff. So you need to play with it a little bit. I'm sure most of you did, and if you play and you find the problems, you end up finding the solutions. So grid view. Grid view is very much like the list view, but this time we have a grid. So just to show you, I always press once more than I need. So let me show you. So again, mostly the same thing, but now our instead of it's mostly the same thing. Instead of list view is a grid view, and we had to use a different delegate because the items changed a little bit. just checking if everything's... The code becomes a little bit more crowded here because of all of the elements we have in our canvas. It seems simple, but there's a lot of things here, like for example, there's a little shadow here and things like that. So it may look a bit strange, but in reality, the main thing here in this is the grid view. So, want to talk about how to...
Before talking about JavaScript and ListModel, there's another view which is not here, and the name is PathView.
PathView.
Have you already heard about it? It's basically a view where the items are put on a path. So the path can be anything. And have you seen some application with a kind of carousel? That's done using a path view. So the path view, you use a path view, which is an ellipse, and the items are put on the path. And you can move them from left to right.
Yeah, you can define several types of paths. It's a mathematical thing.
Yeah,
expression.
a path is a mathematical expression. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you define points and then you have a curve. Yes? Please wait for the...
Is the path going to be only two-dimensional? Because the carousel view you were talking about usually has like the item scale smaller in the...
No, the interesting thing on the path is that you have a value on the path from 0 to 1. 1 being the selected element and 0 being the end of the path. And you can use a delegate which is playing on this value. So you can bound the scale of the item with this value. And it gives you a 3D impression, but it's still 2D.
It's illusion, but
it's all magic.
Okay,
no, in this case, it's just you do the playing into making it look like 3D. And
we didn't talk about this, but in QML you have a Z order. So you can also play on the Z order on the path.
In this case, you have to, because if you don't...
So it's really a cool view if you want to do some kind of...
And there's other things. Someone was asking me... Oh, yeah, there was a question. The list view is pretty much the best way to do, like, you know, this phone, the swipe thing. But in this swipe, you can, it's a carousel. So PathView is probably the way to go into making a carousel, where ListView would go all the way to one side, and you would have to go all the way to the other side. Maybe you could do that with a ListView. A PathView would be better to do that sort of things. Can you please? Okay.
Thank you. So let's talk a bit about models now. What the designer is going to do is to create a mock model. So we have seen how to do this. He used the list model and list element keyword to create a mock model. What you need to do is to remove this mock model and put your real model. And where does it come from? It can come from some C++ code. It can come from XML file. It can come from SQL database. And that's where you... Oh. Oh, it's not... No, sorry. I was 5 minutes to...
Oh, 15 minutes.
Yeah. I was talking about a future slide, sorry. JavaScript and list model. You can You can change your model using JavaScript. You have a number of methods to do this. You can append items, you can remove items, you can move items, you can change the value of items. And you can do this all using JavaScript. For example, here, we have a simple example where we want to add an item to a list. To do that, we just create a mouse area, and when we click on the mouse area, what we do is to insert an object into our list model. Easy. Is it a video?
Yeah,
No,
it's
it's property. And you can see the new item is at the beginning because I've inserted it at the position 0. You can also remove an item from the list. And it's working exactly the same way using remove. And here we introduce something named index. The index is the current position of your delegate. So normally we spend something like 3 hours on QML and models. So it's just to give you an overview of what you can do with models. So you can add append element, you can remove element with JavaScript. This property delete. So you can see the mouse area here is inside the delegate. So the delegate for this view is the whole box here, with a button and with the text. The mouse area is inside the delegate. So when we display something on the screen, the delegate knows which element is displaying. So he knows the index of the element. That's why we introduce the index. And finally, because everything needs to be animated, you can create animation when you do something on the list view. Well, on a view in general, be it a list, a grid, etc. So you have this specific handler on add and on remove, where you can set some animation. And it's pretty cool because oh, it's an horizontal. Okay.
Better move it to vertical.
You see? You first start by sliding the other items, and then you use the opacity to display the new one, which is really nice. And the same thing when removing an item. And how do you do this? You do this, well, I'll show you here. In the list view, you have an on add handler and the on remove handler, and you use some animation.
You can also specify the individual element. You can think about it like one snippet, one little bit of QML code that you can treat the way you want. So we can do other animations there as well in this individual element, like behavior or on other type of thing. Think about it as just one more little bit of QML code. If you want to know and if you need to know the position of that element inside the list view or grid view or whatever, the list view provides you with bindings and properties for those type of things, and it's pretty fun. You just need to play with it, see how it works. The only little problem that I had with list views is if I want to do them all dynamic with lots of funny animations inside it, the way the original size of the list view is evaluated, because it evaluates the item statically, as if it was in the beginning position, and defines the size of the list view like that. And if you have animations like what I was trying to achieve at the time, it was a kind of a clock effect where items would collapse while they would move up or down. It won't work really well because the item scaling will occur not in the correct position, because the list itself is not being adjusted dynamically to the new sizes of the new elements being created, and that's all dynamic. That's the only thing that I would like to warn you about.
Okay, and I was talking about this before, sorry. So we have this really cool list view with lots of animation. Now you need to connect the list view to your own data. You have different ways to do this. You can use an XMLListModel. An XMLListModel is just a model reading an XML file and extracting all the data from the XML file. So you can see you have a source here, you have a query here, and you create some XML role to extract the different data from your file. Do you have internet?
Yes, I think it's online. Yeah.
So here, it's a simple example. I think it's Twitter. So it's taking the Twitter feed. It extracts all the data from the feed. So the feed is an XML file. It extracts all the data from the feed and display them. And it is done in here. So here, what you say is you set the source of your file. So it's the RSS feed from Twitter. You use a query. So do you know xQuery? xQuery is a query mechanism for XML. It's basically like queries for database, for SQL. And then you set some role. So you say that the name is this, and the description, the pub date is this, and the desk is this. So 5 lines of code. You can also use an SQL database. How to do this? Well, you write some JavaScript code to open the database, and then you can execute some query on the database, also using JavaScript. And finally, from the queries, from the JavaScript queries, you are going to populate a model. So you have a list model somewhere, and this list model is populated here. List model.append something. And another solution for you is to use a C++ model. You can create a QAbstract item model or a QList model or whatever you want, and you can export it to QML and use it inside QML. So do you have any question on ListView? We are going really fast on this because it's just to give you an overview. Yeah.
In the XML list properties, you showed us the XML roles. Could you tell me again what those are for?
Here, the role here. Do you remember when we create a list model, we create a list element, and for each element we create some property. So those property can be anything. The XML role you are going to create is basically this. So it's like creating a list model with list element, and those elements will have two properties, one named pubDate and the other one named desk. Okay? Yeah. Just 1 minute.
Yeah, just think about sorting. It's like normally it's done in the model, yeah? And do I have to sort all the stuff in JavaScript, or is there a general way for sorting?
So,
because when you append data, yeah, it was it was always appended in the beginning. And
when we talk about sorting in C++, when we talk about sorting, we are talking about proxy model, right? So we have, you do have your model, and then you have a proxy model that can sort it. In QML, if you want to sort a model, you need to do this with JavaScript. Or if you are using a C++ model, then you just put a proxy model on top of that, export it to QML, and then you can use the sort method from QML. But you don't have any other solution, unfortunately.
Okay. More questions?
Yeah, there's one question you should have asked. What about performances? We are not talking about desktop or laptop. We are talking about this kind of thing. The performances are good because we are only displaying, we are only using delegate for the displayed item.
What's on canvas? Yes.
So you only use memory for the 10 items on the screen. Okay? And whenever you move the list, then you release some memory and create a new one for the new item.
It's good and bad. Sometimes you, especially when you load images from external things, because it will load them as you flick them, you'll see items being populated.
We won't do the lab. We are not going to ask you to do anything because we go a little bit fast here.
So in next module. So next module is, at first sight, pretty much the same thing. Let me just open it. So we saw now, this is going back a little bit, it's about positioning things on screen. And we saw this right now with list views and grid views, and it loads data externally. But this is a more simple way of putting it all together instantly on a canvas and displaying several methods with displaying several items automatically and sending them magically on thing. I don't find this entire section very interesting, because if I want to place anything on canvas, as you saw it, I simply place it. But there is one element which I find interesting, and I'll show you those. That one a little better. Sorry?
Yeah, for a developer point of view, this section is interesting because we have talked about anchor layout at the beginning, right? You know how to place item using anchors. But what about the other layouts? The grid layout we have in Qt, the horizontal layout. How do we do this? Well, they exist and they can be done like this, using both elements. So that's not really layouts, it's an item organizing your element.
Elements. So it's not something I would fight with. I have no problem spacing 3 elements, 20 pixels, and I have no problem at all, I swear to you, about doing this 300 times and making sure that it looks perfect. So, for example, this is a slightly very simple example. A column with a spacing of 20 would result in something like this. And it does a little bit of magic that you could do with anchors, but here it magically does. And for example, if one of the elements is bigger, it still spaces them with the distance of 20 pixels. And you can also do the same thing with rows. Repeater. The repeater, well, repeats the thing. And it can repeat arrays and numbers, and you can state like, repeat, the model part of repeaters are kind of interesting, because sometimes a model can be an array thing, sometimes it can be a number. And in the case of, for example, this repeater for text, it will repeat the text 3 times and display the item, the index number, so 1, 2, 3, 4, so far and so forth.
Yeah, basically it's a for loop to create n items. But we are in a declarative language, so we don't have any for loop. So we use what we call a repeater.
Grids. So grid, it's, well, rows and columns at the same time. You saw a grid on one of the elements. Yes. Remember those 4 squares that we used the keyboard to navigate with? They were aligned with a grid. So does this. Flow, and this is the one I want to show you a little bit because it's more interesting in my opinion. And it's something that I would struggle a little bit to do on Canvas, and this helps me. I need to import.
So what you do with the row, column, or grid, you can do this with a list view or a grid view. I would say you can use a row, or column, or grid when you have a static number of items. That's nice, but for a dynamic number, just use a list view or grid view. It's way better.
Okay, so let me just show you the flow. As you see here, it kind of spaced my elements like this, and I'm going to show you the code and then show you a little bit example of how it can be interesting. So the flow, it basically feeling it's feeling it's in the center of this element we created. Just do something here with a 400 or 500. And now I'm going to make the width equal to the parent. Width. And you'll see the difference when I play this. And then it has and it defines the spacing of 21 here, right? So nothing special, and magically it arranges the items inside your canvas. What you didn't see in the earlier example was this aspect, is that it can magically align them according to space. And you can even specify behaviors or animations when these items change, so it can be really nice and animated. It's good to, if you have several elements of different sizes on your canvas and want to display them nicely and occupy the space nicely, and then delete them, create new elements, and if you state some type of transition between how they appear and they disappear, it's all magical and nice. So, there's one example of something like that used. For example, see, you can achieve these types of effects. Okay.
So
it's fast going one side, it's not fast going the other. Okay. As I said, so you can do this type of enumerations and specify the properties that are going to change, and then it makes things move nicely. Binding.
Oh,
That the example here is, we are not going to show this example, right?
which one?
No.
This one?
No, this one. The one here. This one.
No.
No. Okay. But it's the one I was talking to you about.
Yeah, yeah, it's the slides are a little bit strange because we are mixing different things in this module. I would like to talk a little bit about binding, and that's nice because most of you are developers, so you need to know this. Be really careful when you use binding to not break them. Okay, let me explain. So I'm going to take a small, so you don't have this example in the key, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but for the purpose of what this training is about, the one they show there is, in my opinion, complex to understand. It took me quite some time to understand the binding issue. Even understanding the code is a little bit tricky, and worse, the code itself doesn't work.
Okay. So here we have 3 squares, in one green, one yellow, and one black. When we move the mouse in the yellow one, we want to change the color of the green one. Okay, looks like it works. When we click on the black one, we want to change the color of the green one too. Works. And now if I go back on the yellow one, well, nothing happens.
No longer works.
Yeah. Why? So we have 3 rectangles here. First one, second one, and third one. We have a binding here. When this rectangle has the focus, the color is light green. Okay. In this rectangle, so that's the center one. When we move the mouse inside this rectangle, what we want is to change the color of the first rectangle. To do that, what we do is to do a binding. So here you can see this mouse area is named focus area. And we create a binding. In the first rectangle, we create a binding between contains mouse and focus. Okay? Do you understand the code here? And the last rectangle here has, oh, sorry. And the last rectangle here has also a mouse area. And in the last rectangle, what we do is to use handlers. So when we unpressed, we change the focus of the first rectangle, and when we release, we also change the focus of the first rectangle. So here we are not using a binding, but we are using a JavaScript, some JavaScript affectation. And by doing this, what we do is to break the first binding. So when we affect a value here at focus, then focus is not this anymore, but it's true. Okay, you see? You understand the difference between binding and JavaScript affectation? And you understand how we break the binding? So be really careful when you use binding and JavaScript. You should either use one or the other. And to fix this, we have even 3 different ways to fix this. Either we use a binding for everything. So if you look here, you can see that we have a binding on the second rectangle, but we also have a binding on the third one. Or is it this one? No, sorry. Or you use JavaScript affectation for everything. So here we don't have any binding on focus, but we change the focus when we enter the second rectangle, or when we exit the second rectangle, and we also change the focus when we press the third rectangle or when we release the third rectangle. And there's a third way to do this, is to use another property.
Alias.
It's not. That's how you would do this.
I've learned alias lately, and it was asking about the alias property. And alias is very useful for this. The alias property is kind of like any other property. It takes it binds 2 different things together, and the first one created, the alias, copies the second. So it's used here. Oh, this is actually useful here, because they solved this problem with the alias property. And it's quite, they take a long time explaining this, and then it doesn't really work. But sorry, going too far. Let me just show you the code.
But
doesn't work.
Do you understand the
problem?
The problem here and the solution we have to solve this problem. If you have understood this, you have understood almost everything. Yeah,
because there's several ways. If you understand the problem, then there's several ways you can go around it. Basically, the problem is if you state a binding that deletes a previous binding that you've declared, then it's gone. Not have it anymore. So you either have to declare very complex bindings that take care of all of the things going on, or you use alias property, which is kind of interesting, but takes a long time. Honestly, this example here, I can show you how it doesn't work. Model 4, and I think it's main. So I'll show you, and in theory this is with the slider fixed, but take no attention on the ball. thing. So in theory, you can do this. You can also click here, and it goes anywhere. See? And then you press here, and it goes to 20%. And then you can go back and do what you're doing. But now, the button no longer works. And apparently this code was working, but it's not. And the problem is that on the slider thing, you see this property alias. It's the thing doing the magic. And what's wrong here, and why it's not working twice, is for some reason that I'm not fully aware yet, is that this property alias here that connects the knob X factor that is being called in several places, because all the times we pressed on the elements, we are changing the knob X, and the knob is the thingy binding. And every time that happens, if there's no alias property, see, we use something in between. It's this value and then an alias. So that's what the alias thing is really for, at least my understanding, is to do that intermediate, that in-between step of changing the value without changing the binding. So every time one of the elements of those alias that changes, it reconnects to the thing that you want to change without breaking everything. So, and this doesn't work only because this needs to be here, I think. And then I need to do remove this one to knob X, something like this. I have this code fixed my place. I need to change to my XML. Let me see if now it's working. Yeah, apart from the percentage thing that is wrong now, because of the thing that I changed there, and this click here no longer works because it's also connected in a different way, because I removed that element, the name there that was an in-between variable, but it should be knob X. They should all be canalized to the same thing you want to change. Apart from that, it's working now because you can press the 20% value and it goes back to the 20%. So, something you can test. Okay. Let's start with the other. Or do we want to talk about the state problem?
No. Oh.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, one thing about this slide, you can have state machine for different items. So that's, if you want to have different states at the same time, it's a way to do this. You have one state machine at the root item and another one in the child item.
Okay, so questions? Well, I think you had an idea. Why some might ask, why don't I do this with list views and grid views? Most of the things that we would talk about in the first part, where we talked about grids and stuff. Yes, you could. This is something. The main difference is that now they are all loaded at the beginning. So even if they are off screen, the CPU will load them and display them. Sometimes I show you when I'm scaling our applications. Remember the spaceship? You see parts of the spaceship at the end because everything's being displayed, just not on screen, but it's being calculated by the CPU and it's taking memory and all of that. Sometimes it's good, sometimes bad. Depends on what you're trying to achieve. Module 5.
Before we go to Module 5, maybe after the break. I had a really interesting question. I don't remember. I think it was you who asked me a question about where is the limit between the designer and the developer. That's really interesting. You see that now we are talking the same language. So what, as a developer, what should I expect from the designer? And as a designer, what should you do?
Let's talk about my experience.
Yes.
Having done this for, I'm still very, very bad QML coder, and I take great pride of it, of still being a very bad QML coder, and not knowing much, but it ends up rubbing off a few of the problems. And one, talking to Nicolas or any other of the guys that I talk with, they explain to me the problem, like, and then I get it, like, oh, this is not working, it's, or worse, they'll show me an example on the actual machine and I'll see it, like, seeing things that was working fine on my computer, fast and smooth, and then having chops. And it's very interesting because sometimes I might have different ideas on how to make the problems that the specific hardware has solved in different ways. I think that if the developer understands the language and the basic problems that are going on, he may bring different points of view into fixing those problems. I was talking to her a little bit about, and she has a problem with a thing they are trying to animate and creating scroll bars, right? And it's hard, and because the device doesn't capture all of the items because the screen is not that perfect. And I told her, maybe if you do it this way, I don't know, but it's to think outside of the box. Sometimes the designer has different ideas, and because the mindset is different, maybe you'll bring new ideas to fix problems that sometimes the developer will try to fix it on the hard way. Like, I want 60 frames per second. The mindset is different. Sometimes there's design tricks that can be applied there, and the result is fine. Like, for example, I remember there's a very good example, reflection. You know those, well...
You know iTunes?
You know this reflection on the bottom of these windows?
Oh, you can't see it.
You can see it on this one. Okay, see, there's this little reflection here. How do you do that in QML? Question. We don't have masks in QML. That's how a designer would do it. So a very easy way to do it is make a copy of the thing, make a copy of the background, apply a mask to the background, a static image mask, put it on top of the scene you're trying to render, and it gives the impression of this element being masked. And bonus, and I think this is the way they are doing it here. There's always when trying to do this, if you apply a mask, alpha mask effect to the copy, you'll end up seeing, you don't see it there really well, but you'll end up seeing the back of the other reflected element under the second reflected element, and that's plain wrong, because in reality it looks like this. And using this trick, putting a copy of the background on top of the thing, you don't. So it's just a different way. It's very low on CPU because there's nothing fancy going on there. You don't need to have a mask being calculated or recalculated. For example, if you want to animate the mask, the second element, the reflection, and even if we add masks, it would be extremely CPU intensive because every time the thing goes around, it will have to recalculate and remake the mask, and that's insane. And this is really low on CPU. So there's a lot of tricks that come from a guy that does design all day that will bring to the table, and wow, I think I remember the reactions like, that's a pretty neat idea.
Yeah. But on the other way, as a developer, you shouldn't wait for anything from the designer. I mean, he is not a developer, so if he writes some code to do things, that's okay. But you have to look at the code and to maybe refactor it, remove copy and paste and use component, or I don't know.
My mistakes are far worse than those.
So, as a developer, don't wait for the designer to write anything. Yes, we have a question there.
I'm a UI designer, and I don't have a technical background.
Yes, a UI designer.
Am I the only one here?
How many now? 1, 2?
Yeah, one and a half.
Anyway, I was wondering, like, how strongly do you really expect for the designer to be able to code? Because this training is kind of scaring me.
Don't be scared. I have a model just for you.
Okay.
The thing is, don't be scared at the first. The last two models we just gave are scary. We know that. I know that. When I learned that, it's not that hard. But the first two models, were you at the first two models here?
I think I came in like 15 minutes late, but I think I caught most.
Yeah,
at
the first two models. Do you thought those were very, very complex?
No, like the beginning was very comprehensive. I mean, I could easily understand it. I'm just wondering, does it really, does it make sense to put the designer to actually do this coding part when you could have, like, just sit next to the developer and have them do it?
That's exactly what that QML is about. You can sit with the developer and do it together. And it's perfectly fine, but you are talking the same language.
Yeah, but it's not totally bad that we UI designers play with it. If you understood first and second module, you'll be able to do pretty much anything you want.
Yeah.
The rest, the list
could,
views and stuff, that's just a way of. It's actually, I think it's there because it's also in the other module for Qt Quick. It's tricky, and it will help you along the way when you're starting doing a lot of lists. See, I've spent hours and hours putting items here, and it's becoming boring. Isn't there an easier way? But that grows on you if you're playing with this. But for 90% of the things that we do, you don't actually need to code anything. And I'll show you that in the next module, that I'll spend some time, and I'll just import something from Photoshop into Qt Quick, and you'll see I'm going to do most of the thing without doing one line of code.
Just another question. I work with multiple different kinds of clients, or basically different platforms. So for example, sometimes it's web design, sometimes I'm designing a mobile application, sometimes it's iPhone, Android, you name it.
Yeah.
So is it worth the effort to learn to do Qt Quick, or would it make more sense that when I'm doing a Qt Quick project, I just sit next to the developer when we need to communicate, and basically let him do the actual coding, and I just consult or something like that?
Can I, being honest about that, and this is not what is going on right now, but I would hope that there's already Qt Quick for Android, and I would hope, and I think that we're not touching here is components, but components help you a lot, because it's just the items that we need to just place them on the canvas and define how they want to do it. And so Android and this guy's done. Apparently there's something for iPhone. Qt for iPhone port. There's something.
No, only the core.
No, there's something like that going on. So if that happens, awesome. One tool, lots of places. If this thing becomes too specialized only in one target, I could say embedded. Embedded is a huge target, and just alone that would be worth it. But yeah, you might have a point if it becomes very narrow. Don't waste your life
Okay.
learning.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Yeah, one thing for designer, yeah, that's true. It's difficult, and I think it's also difficult for the developers because we are going really fast here. It's just an overview. But the thing is, you are going to put things on the screen. And at some point, you would like to animate them. And you learn, because it's easy. Maybe you'll need some time to sit down with a developer, but after the third or fourth time, you learn how to animate them.
Yeah, really.
And that's nice. That's nice.
No, really, really. I bet you've been in that position where you've tried to explain a perfect animation. You have it in your head, and it's perfect, and it's fluid, and it's awesome, and you have to spend 3 days explaining it to a developer. And you'll use every tool you have, and if there's a tool that you actually know how to use, and it's not too complicated, and you can do a lot of trial and error, that's what I do. I trial and error. Don't like, don't like, don't like. I go there and try and see how it works.
To the developer. So maybe it's because we're kind of splitting these two different roles, and there's even a third person that is
That was
involved.
the first 15 minutes of my presentation. It was that designers are not all the same, as you know. We have the user, and we, even among ourselves, we have this problem of communication and different skill sets, and spending a lot of emails back and forth, like, that's not what I want, and it's not easy. And I wanted to talk with guys of Qt Creator to implement inside Qt Creator wireframing tools. I think it would be awesome for interaction designers to be able to do that inside the Qt Creator and pass that to the graphical designer and then to motion designer. Okay.